My name is Janet Lenahan, and I have the pleasure of serving as Dean of the Frank G. Zarb School of Business. Before I begin, I would like to recognize and thank President Rabinowitz and the Board of Trustees for their support in the creation and launch of our new state-of-the-art Cybersecurity, Innovation, and Research Center. It is also my great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's very special joint event hosted by the Fred DeMatteis School of Engineering and Applied Science and the Zarb School of Business. I know this will be a fascinating discussion on the need of strong public and private sector partnerships in addressing the growing importance of cybersecurity. And our brand new center, which I invite you to tour later this evening, is truly a great example of such a partnership. Funded in part by a $200,000 Empire State Development Grant awarded by the Long Island Regional Economic Development Council, its aim is to be a training and educational resource, not only for our students, but also for local institutions in the metropolitan region. The sophisticated technology in the center will train students to detect and defend against cybercrime. With a hacker attack estimated to occur every 39 seconds, cybercrime is a growing threat for all business and government, and is estimated to cost $6 billion globally by 2021. With an alarming shortage of knowledge workers in the field, currently estimated at 300,000 and expected to grow to 3.5 million in a few years, the Cybersecurity, Innovation, and Research Center will help prepare the workforce needed to fill this void. As President Rabinowitz noted at the ribbon-cutting ceremony last week, and I quote, "We have created a center that will train a new generation of cybersecurity experts who can stay ahead of our increasingly sophisticated hackers and safeguard the information technology that power our economy." A key differentiator of a Hofstra education is our commitment to providing innovative and hands-on learning experiences for our students. And this center, with the only academic cyber war room in the New York metropolitan area, will provide students with the opportunity to use cutting-edge technology and simulation software to create hyper-realistic cyber attack scenarios and work through all the resulting issues in real time. Our faculty, both from the DeMatteis School and the Zarb School, who you will meet later tonight, have done a superb job of bringing together all the necessary tools to provide students with the knowledge and skills needed to deal with the challenges of working in an ever-increasing virtual world. From a new interdisciplinary MS in cybersecurity, offering 2 concentrations, one in technology and one in management and policy, to an MBA with a concentration in cybersecurity and a BS in cybersecurity, the Hofstra Center for Cybersecurity, Innovation, and Research will serve as the foundation of innovative curriculum and also to help create partnerships between industry, government, and education to analyze threats, strengthen network security, and mitigate the economic impact of cybercrime. And now I would like to introduce my dear colleague, whose leadership was instrumental in the creation of this center. Dean Rabbani is the Dean of the Fred DeMatteis School of Engineering and Applied Science.
Thank you, Janet, and welcome everyone again. I'm pleased to welcome Special Agent Peter Kazon as our keynote speaker tonight for the launch of Hofstra Cybersecurity Innovation and Research Center. Peter is a 1994 graduate of SUNY Maritime College and served in U.S. Coast Guard from 1994 to 2000. In March 2000, he began a career in the FBI. For his first 11 years, Peter worked on cases focused on international drug trafficking and violent crime. Thereafter, from 2012 to 2016, he was the supervisor of an international violent crime squad that focused on translational violent crime and extraterritorial violent crime matters. In April 2016, Peter shifted his focus to cybercrime and joined the FBI New York Cyber Branch. From April 2016 until recently, specifically August 2019, he was assigned to Squad CY2 and was the lead case agent of various cybercriminal investigations that focused on computer network intrusions. During that time, he also earned a master's degree in cybersecurity from Fordham University. In September 2019, Peter became the supervisor of the Squad CY1, which focuses on cyber national security threats based on Eurasia. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Peter Kazon.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a nice audience. I have to say I was a little bit freaked out by seeing my picture on the digital billboard outside as I was driving up. I didn't expect that, but it's nice, I guess. So thank you for having me, and this is a really exciting evening, I think, for Hofstra, and we're here to celebrate the opening of a great new facility that will undoubtedly elevate Hofstra's cybersecurity degree programs. This facility will be used to accurately simulate real-world cyber attacks and better prepare students for the types of incident response scenarios they may face as they enter the workforce in this ever-growing field of cybersecurity. We all know that lecture hall work is good, but there is no substitute for hands-on experience. Having used a similar facility to this one not too long ago, I participated in a training event with other agencies. We used IBM's Cyber Range facility, very similar to this one, up in Cambridge for a couple of day event, and it was a really good experience, some of the best training I ever had in this area, so I really can value what you guys are doing here. It's really going to be helpful, without a doubt. It's great because you get to contextualize all those principles you learn in the classroom and get to put it to use, and then mix it and marry it with some of the more important attributes you need, which are things like judgment, communication, team building, and put it all together. And a facility like this is really going to allow you to do that. So I definitely commend Hofstra for this program and for developing this. I also commend the Long Island Regional Economic Development Council for having the foresight and the wisdom to invest in something like this. And I definitely want to congratulate Dr. Kim and Dr. Yu for putting this together and for getting it done. So this is certainly going to make Hofstra's programs better. And I think that's pretty obvious. But what I want to spend my time doing tonight is try and make an argument that may be a little bit less obvious, that the opening of this facility is significant for much bigger reasons that go way beyond just making a university on Long Island a little better. I want to offer you a little perspective as an FBI agent currently working in the field of cybercrime and tell you why I think the creation of this facility is actually a microcosm of what should be done as part of a broader national strategy that will be so vital to our collective efforts in combating cyber threats going forward. The key phrase in that last sentence was collective efforts, because that's what it's going to take, a layered approach that will rely heavily on strong, robust public and private sector partnerships and efforts. A strategy whose nucleus is going to have to be an army of strong private sector cybersecurity professionals that are able to adroitly self-defend and respond internally to cyber incidents against their company's networks. And then, equally as important, understand how the intelligence gleaned from those specific incidences has value to the collective cybersecurity community, and how that value is multiplied the more that information is shared with private sector peers and public authorities. The last part is critical because we are currently living in a cybersecurity culture that seems to frown upon reporting and sharing internal incidents. And we can understand why to some extent. There are liabilities and potential vulnerabilities, reputational and other, that come along with exposing your dirty cyber laundry. But we need to understand that on scale, that culture is only helping the enemy. Now, the government, and the FBI specifically, does have a lot to offer, and it's a critical role to play. But when you juxtapose the size and scale of this threat with the limited resources we have to bear on this issue, you can easily see that the gap is Grand Canyon-like. So what that means is, to be effective, we need to direct our limited resources in the right places. And to do that, we need a clear picture of what is going on out there. And that picture will only be accurately portrayed with private sector input. And even then, many cyber threats will still go unaddressed by law enforcement. That's just a fact. More simply stated, the FBI, law enforcement in general, the US government will not be able to thwart the expansion of cyber threats alone, not even close. So it's my goal today to try and make each of you understand that cybercrime is not the FBI's problem or law enforcement's problem in general. It's not the NSA or DOD's problem, it's everyone's problem. And that problem will have to be addressed through thorough collaboration, partnerships, information sharing, and the smart use of government and law enforcement resources. And this facility, this new facility that we're honoring today, both in how it was funded and how it was developed and how it will be utilized, is a perfect example of that model in action. So now, in order to effectively make this argument, I think it's necessary for me to give you a bit of an overview of the current cyber threat landscape as the FBI sees it. I'm going to warn you, it's going to be a grim and somewhat dark picture. I'm also going to go a little darker and give you a little insight into how we at the FBI are aligned so that you could better understand what I mean by that Grand Canyon type gap I mentioned earlier. In doing that, I also want to manage your expectations a bit about what happens when incidents are reported to the FBI, and how there's a very high likelihood that we will not open a case on an incident that's reported to us. But we still want and need that information. But fear not, as the true optimist that I am, I'm also going to brighten things up a bit by providing you with a few examples of how effective we in law enforcement can be with strong private sector support and cooperation. I will also continue to give you some more hope by speaking a bit more about how this mindset of public-private sector collaboration and information sharing can be so effective to close that gap. So I'll give you an example. So in early 2014, 30-year-old Andrei Tirin sat in his apartment in Moscow, and using 2 laptop computers and his 10 to 15 years of self-taught hacking skills, he began scanning various IP addresses that he knew to be publicly associated with JP Morgan Chase, the large bank. But it wasn't money that Tirin was after. Instead, he was after customer information, and more specifically, email addresses and stock portfolios. Why? Because that's what Tirin was hired to do. You see, for the past 2 years, Tirin had been working for a small group of criminal actors that had been leading a large-scale hacking campaign that targeted major financial institutions, brokerage firms, and news agencies. Their end goal was to make large amounts of money through stock market manipulation and through the delivery of spam emails designed to drive traffic to their multiple illicit online marketplaces that sell illegal pharmaceuticals, pornography, and host online gambling. Tirin had been born and raised in Moscow, Russia. After spending about 3 years in Moscow University and 5 years in the Russian army, Tirin began earning money from home doing what he loved best, computer science. Specifically, Tirin enjoyed hacking and the challenge of defeating network security systems. He was almost exclusively self-taught, very bright guy, and he learned how to monetize that skill by doing freelance black hat SEO work, which meant using the information he gathered through hacking networks to drive traffic to his clients' websites. In 2012, he began working almost exclusively for that aforementioned group of criminals, which was paying him anywhere from $50,000 to $60,000 a month for his services. After carefully and meticulously scanning each of JP Morgan IP addresses that he had, he discovered one platform that allowed users to upload files. Tirin then used this feature to upload a malicious file that contained an executable. That executable contained a tiny backdoor shell that allowed Tirin to gain access to that network going forward. From there, he conducted several weeks, actually months, of recon until he identified a way to elevate his access privileges to that of administrator. Tirin then used that elevated access to gain entry into JP Morgan Chase's customer database. Now, he had admin access, so he was in. Then he began extracting data to the tune of over 80 million customer records. From the beginning to end, the entire effort took Tyrion approximately 4 months. On August 7, 2014, the IT folks at JP Morgan noticed the large exfil and immediately knew they had a problem. They then acted swiftly and identified and isolated the IP addresses being used by Tyrion and blacklisted them from their networks. They then also performed a few other additional measures that effectively and quickly eradicated the persistent threat being caused by Tyrion. But the damage was done. Those records were gone. Shortly thereafter, the FBI New York office was notified of this incident. The complaint was routed to one of our criminal cyber squads, and that squad immediately engaged with JP Morgan Chase. In the FBI New York office, our agency's largest field office, we have a branch dedicated to cyber. That branch consists of 6 squads. We call our team squads, each made up of a supervisor, about 5 to 7 special agents, approximately 2 intelligence analysts, 2 to 3 task force officers from various different agencies like the NYPD, the U.S. Marshals, CBP, Department of Energy, and others. The branch also includes several FBI full-time computer scientists that assist with our cases technically. 3 of the 6 squads are dedicated to criminal matters, cyber criminal matters. The other 3 are dedicated to national security matters. So in total, we have about 70 or so professionals working this threat here in New York. This is not necessarily how every FBI office is arranged, though. Many of our small offices may not have a dedicated cyber branch. Matter of fact, most don't. But they will have agents assigned to the threat. Every field office is now tasked with addressing cyber threats. Cyber is considered a top priority by our headquarters, so it must be addressed by every field office. Supporting and guiding all of those field office resources is FBI's headquarters cyber division. Under that division, headquarters supports the field office towards combating cyber threats by providing funding, complaint management, technical resources, and strategic guidance. In addition to our field office resources, we also have several agents that are trained in cyber matters that are stationed around the globe in various different U.S. embassies as part of our LEGET program. We call them cyber ALATs. We have them in strategic countries where cybercrime is most prevalent. And they help facilitate and move forward our cases internationally. So how many complaints related to cyber does the FBI receive? Well, through our IC3 platform, which is our online internet complaint platform, we receive approximately 900 per day. That accumulates to over 350,000 per year, and the losses reported on that platform exceed 1.5 billion annually. Then at the field office level, we also receive complaints pretty routinely, probably about a dozen a week at least. Now, while we're not the only law enforcement agency that works cybercrime and threats, you can still easily see the contrast between the amount of incoming complaints and the amount of resources that we have. There's a big difference there. So how do we initiate cases and how do we decide on which cases to open? Well, I mentioned one before, which was complaints. So one of the ways we initiate cases is just by the complaints coming in from those different platforms. We also get complaints and leads from our prosecutor partners, SDNY and EDNY. They'll sometimes get complaints given to them and then they'll forward them on to us. We initiate some cases through intel reporting. So our intel analysts are always looking to see what trends are out there and what's happening in the world of cyber threats, and if we see an emerging thread, we'll maybe open a case on that matter without having a complainant. And then we also rely on sources, confidential human sources. They're not as prevalent in cyber as they are in other violations, but they're still there, and they still help us initiate investigations, identify targets. And something that we're doing more and more of late is undercover operations, online undercover operations. We're present in some chat rooms, we're present in some dark markets, and we're there and we're interacting with the bad guys and we're trying to initiate cases that way. Now, what makes us decide what cases to open? I mentioned before that huge gap between resources and demand. Well, a couple of factors. There's no clear-cut formula, but we consider a few things. One is the amount of loss. So when you have an incident, what was the impact of that incident? How much loss was there? And what is the prosecutor's appetite for pursuing a case like that? Who is the victim? Is it a public sector victim? Is it part of our critical infrastructure? What is the impact to the general public and national priorities? A good example of that would be, right now we're looking hard at any incident that's related to election tampering. So if we see it, we've already gotten some complaints about some networks that are involved in the election process being port scanned. So we're going to take a close look at that because it's a national priority. How an incident correlates to an existing or ongoing case or trend. So we may have a small incident that we may not normally take on its own, but if it is connected to a larger case that's already existing, then obviously we're going to take a closer look at it. But the biggest factor is caseload and resource availability. That's just going to vary from month to month, day to day, but that's going to be a major contributing factor to what we take and what we open and don't open. Getting back to the JP Morgan case, based on the criteria I just laid out for you, that was a no-brainer. We were going to open a case on that. Critical infrastructure, a lot of victims, a lot of loss. So in August 2014, FBI agents arrived at JP Morgan Chase to meet with their team handling the crisis. Now, at this point, JP Morgan had a choice to make. They could have done only what was legally required of them, immediately make their regulated required notifications, and only respond to whatever legal process we served on them. Or they could choose to fully cooperate with the FBI and completely assist with the investigation. Luckily, they chose the latter. So armed with that already identified list of malicious IP addresses that JP Morgan provided us, which were based out of several different countries to include Egypt, Poland, Germany, Canada, Brazil, the FBI agents immediately passed those IP addresses to our appropriate cyber ALATs and the overseas assignments, along with MLAT requests. MLAT stands for Mutually Legal Assistance Treaty. It's the legal process by which we request legal assistance from a foreign country. That's part of the treaty. So along with those IP addresses being passed, we made some MLAT requests to ask host country law enforcement to serve legal process on those ISPs so we can get some information on those servers. You see, the criminal organization that hired Tyrion set up these proxy servers, and they did that to help obfuscate where Tyrion was coming from, but they also strategically placed those proxy servers in countries that would not seem odd to JP Morgan's network to have traffic coming from those particular servers. So it was carefully thought out. In addition to overseeing, to leveraging our overseas ALAT resources, the FBI partnered up with the Secret Service to add additional investigative resources to this case. As the investigation progressed and returns from those MLAT requests came back, thanks to great cooperation from our international law enforcement partners, we did identify a single email address that was associated with one of those proxy servers that was of great interest. It was unique, and it was unique in that it was clear that it was actually the personal email address of one of the criminal actors in this organization. It was a mistake, which oftentimes is how we catch criminals. They make mistakes. So they mistakenly used a real email address for one of those servers. We capitalized on that, and from that identified one of the criminal actors. That individual was then indicted and arrested in Israel in May of 2016, and soon after that extradited to the United States. That big break led to a series of additional investigative leads and clues, which eventually led to the identification of Tyrion. Several months later, Tyrion was charged by the SDNY in a sealed indictment. Now the challenge was, how do you arrest a Russian national who's sitting in Russia? That's a challenge. The answer, patience. So we wait, and we did that. And in late 2017, the FBI became aware of Tyrion's intentions to travel to the country of Georgia. Armed with that knowledge, and again with our overseas liaison partners, we worked to put in action a formal request to the Republic of Georgia to arrest Tyrion upon his arrival, and they agreed to do so. That operation was successful. A few months later, on September 7, 2018, myself and a team of FBI agents traveled to Georgia on the FBI director's plane to take custody of Tyrion to bring him back to the SDNY. Why did we use the FBI plane? Well, first of all, it's pretty cool. It's a nice plane. But beyond that, we had a very short timetable to go grab him. Due to Georgia's extradition laws, they gave us a very short period of time in order to come get him, otherwise they would have released him. The other reason why we used the FBI plane was that we knew that he had been visited in prison a couple of times by representatives of the Russian government. So we figured he was coached. And one of the things he was probably coached on was that if he took a commercial flight back to the United States and he landed in a layover country, he could try and claim asylum and cause problems for us in terms of the extradition. So to avoid that, we procured our own plane and flew him straight from Georgia right to Manhattan. So why did I highlight this case? Because it showcases the power of collaboration and cooperation. Obviously, the cooperation of JP Morgan was critical. But in addition, the case also showcased the value of our partnerships with other agencies, like the Secret Service, with our international law enforcement partners, as demonstrated to the proxy server information we obtained from foreign law enforcement, and from the help we received with the overseas arrests and extraditions. It also highlights the immense amount of resources and commitment the FBI does have to bring to bear on specific cases that we do work. So let me give you one more quick example, which is much more simpler, much less sophisticated, but still highlights the benefits of good private-public sector cooperation, and it specifically relates to university security, so it kind of hits home. On September 6, 2016, the FBI New York office received a complaint from a New York area-based university, I won't name the name, but it's not Hofstra, regarding their realization that many, many students' email accounts had been compromised. What they had noticed was a severe uptick in students complaining about losing access to their student school email accounts. Sensing something was wrong, the university hired a third-party mitigation company to come in and audit their email security system and networks. What that revealed was that one specific IP address, based in Phoenix, Arizona, had been responsible for changing the passwords to over 1,000 student email accounts from this particular university. What they also realized was that, not unlike many US universities, unfortunately, the email password reset utility they were using was not very secure and was somewhat easy to defeat. More specifically, the reset questions asked when the reset questions were prompted to the user, if you put in a wrong answer over and over again, it didn't lock you out. You can keep guessing over and over again. Plus, it allowed some of the questions to be like, what's your favorite color? So obviously, you can 6 or 7 tries, you're going to get that one. And that, what also made this university, or N universities, a good target for this scheme is that email directories, email addresses of students are not that hard to get publicly. Most universities have directories of email addresses, or they have a pattern in which they create their email addresses that's pretty easy to decipher. First name, last name, at university.edu, or something like that. So it makes it for a very easy way to guess emails or procure emails to then try the password against. Plus, when you add the immense amount of social media presence that most college-age people have, doing social engineering research on those targets is fairly easy to do. All that together, this particular actor became very good at defeating these password systems. Nothing all that sophisticated. He wasn't a hacker, he wasn't a programmer. He just got good at doing this. But once again, the victim entity was willing to cooperate fully with the FBI and gave the mitigation firm permission to share all the information with us entirely. With that, we quickly resolved the IP address back to a large County and Temp services company that has nationwide branches. So it appeared the individual was using a work-based computer to perpetrate this crime. Our next move was to contact the internal security IT folks at this firm. We knew that we would need internal help to correlate that IP address to a specific user. They were extremely helpful. They were quickly able to resolve the IP to an employee named Jonathan Powell. Now the next step was to build a case against Mr. Powell and also determine what his motivation was for these attacks. We assumed it was monetary in some way, and what the damages were. First, in cooperation with the FBI's investigation, the company began monitoring all of Powell's network traffic and providing that information to the FBI, network traffic related to his work computer. We were very quickly able to see how he was frequently visiting university websites almost all day long, every day. Next, we needed to get our hands on that company laptop that he was using so we can examine it forensically, so we could build a case. We needed to do so in a way that would not tip him off, and so that he wouldn't wipe it before giving it up. Once again, the company's cooperation was needed, and they obliged. At our direction, they had a member of their IT department recall the device suddenly under the ruse that it needed a software update needed to be installed on it. Not thinking anything of it, Powell surrendered his laptop in exchange for a new device. That original device was then handed over to the FBI for a forensic review. What was found was plenty of evidence of unauthorized email access and several folders of female names containing private, sexually explicit photos of those females. Turns out Powell was not in it for the money. He was essentially a digital peeping Tom, and he was after private, illicit photos and videos of college-age girls. This investigation revealed that he had done this effectively to at least 6 other universities over the course of about a year, and he had compromised over 2,000 accounts. And the extent of that breach went way beyond the emails because he would use the access to those email accounts to then hop over to those victims' iCloud accounts, Dropbox accounts, social media platforms. A lot of the students would use their school email address as a recovery email address or as a login for those accounts, so you can easily get into those. So once again, a successful case that resulted in immense cooperation from both the victim university and the company that the subject was basing his operations from. So those are two quick examples. Now let's talk more about in general terms, what the threat landscape is overall as we see it in the FBI. Am I doing on time? Am I okay? Okay. At the FBI, we're seeing an increase in the complexity of cyber threats. Virtually every national security threat and crime problem the FBI faces is cyber-based or facilitated. We're seeing an evolution in the impact, scale, and speed of these threats. For example, a single cyber intrusion can impact millions of individuals with the click of a download button. The FBI and our partners in state and local government, in the US government, international partners, and private industry are also worried about the wider than ever range of threat actors, from multinational cyber criminal syndicates to nation-state adversaries to terrorists using social media for recruiting and radicalization. We've seen a rise, what we are referring to as blended or hybrid threats. Blended threats are hybrid threats of nation-states working in tandem with criminal actors to target US, its businesses, and its people. The methods and tools used by these malicious cyber actors are increasingly sophisticated. The scale of criminal tools and services on the dark web makes it easier for actors of all skill levels to partake in nefarious cyber activities. The tools themselves are becoming more sophisticated. We at the FBI separate cyber threat categories into two main buckets: national security or nation-state threats and criminal threats. On the nation-state threat side, as the Director of National Intelligence stated in 2019 worldwide threat assessment testimony, our adversaries and strategic competitors will increasingly use cyber capabilities, including cyber espionage, attack, and influence to seek political, economical, and military advantage over the United States and its allies and partners. At present, China and Russia pose the greatest espionage and cyber attack threats, but we anticipate that all of our adversaries and strategic competitors will increase, build, and integrate cyber espionage, attack, and influence capabilities into their efforts to influence U.S. policies and advance their own national security interests. For years, our adversaries and strategic competitors have conducted cyber espionage to collect intelligence and target our critical infrastructure to hold it at risk. They are now becoming more adept at using social media and to alter how we think, behave, and decide. As we connect and integrate billions of new digital devices into our lives and business processes, malicious actors almost certainly will gain greater insight into and access to our protected information. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea increasingly use cyber operations to threaten both minds and machines in an expanding number of ways, to steal information, to influence our citizens, and to disrupt our critical infrastructure. The FBI is also engaged in a full spectrum of criminal threats, as I mentioned before, which range from one-off criminals and insider threats to criminal enterprises, nation-state proxies, nation-state actors, supplementing their income through cybercrime and mercenary elements. To counter cyber criminal threats, the FBI is building capabilities, strengthening partnerships, both domestic and foreign, and imposing a cost, when possible, using all sorts of tools. We at the FBI are taking an enterprise approach to criminal cyber threats. This means that our strategy is to disrupt and ultimately dismantle the most significant cyber criminal enterprises. By cyber enterprise, I mean that we use our resources to uncover the hierarchy, global infrastructure, and money laundering networks that are essential to these criminal services and associated with criminal cybercrime. Some of the current cyber threats that we're seeing currently is more and more sophisticated obfuscation techniques, ways that criminals are obfuscating where they are. That's getting more and more sophisticated and more complicated. We are seeing more theft, fraud, and illegal activity associated with the use of cryptocurrencies. We are seeing, obviously, an increase in ransomware. We are seeing an increase in reported e-skimming or online skimming, in which cyber criminals use malicious code on websites to steal online payment data real time. We are seeing an uptick in business email compromise, costing victims billions of dollars in fraud losses over the past 5 years. So when you digest all of what I just provided you, what are some of the characteristics that stand out about cyber threats and make this very different threat for law enforcement than we've encountered before? I'll say first and foremost is two main challenges. It's visibility and it's scale. By visibility, I'm referring to the inability for law enforcement to know what is happening on private networks without those private entities reporting those activities back to us. This is especially true, of course, in the United States, where we protect privacy and restrain our law enforcement agencies from having access to our networks without proper legal process or probable cause. This is, of course, a good thing, but it does create a visibility problem. The results of traditional crime tend to be much more apparent and obvious. The occurrence of a homicide or a bank robbery is awfully difficult to prevent law enforcement from noticing it. It's going to be obvious. But network intrusions is almost impossible for us to know about if it's not reported. The other visibility issue is just attribution. The cyber platforms, to include proxies, VPNs, et cetera, make it very easy for perpetrators to remain anonymous. With regard to scale, I'm referring to the tremendous scope of cyber threats as well as the borderless nature of the threat. With scope, being that almost all data is now digital, the risk profile is astronomical. The amount of potential targets and methods that can be deployed against those targets are too large to even quantify. Then, being that the internet connects the entire world, every nefarious actor in the world is only one command line entry away, one SSH connection, RDP connection, URL entry away from knocking on your network's door. So the potential number of perpetrators is endless. Contrast this to the FBI efforts to combat Italian organized crime in the latter part of the 20th century, for example, which we were very successful in doing. How many total LCN gangsters were we dealing with back then? A few thousand, maybe? Located primarily in a few main cities like New York, Philadelphia, Chicago. On this front, the cyber front, we're looking at millions spread out all over the world in every corner and every basement. Another characteristic about this threat that is important to consider is the technical aspect. Investigating these types of cases does require a level of technical ability and acumen that is not yet ubiquitous among law enforcement officers. We have gotten much better in this area, and we continue to do so, but there's still a dearth of skill set in this area that needs to be improved upon, and currently further limits our capabilities. So what is my point to all of this? My point is, don't expect law enforcement to solve this problem. We will undoubtedly be a big part of this solution and will play a critical role going forward. But due to the scale and scope of this matter, every company or entity that relies on a computer network must learn how to self-defend. Private sector cyber professionals must fill that gap. And beyond self-defense, we must be better at sharing information and intelligence with one another. Most attacks are deployed using methods and techniques and signatures that are not unique to that specific victim. As a victim, whenever you're experiencing on your network is almost definitely happening to several other networks as well, probably to other entities in your same profession. Finding different ways to safely share and collaborate in the near real time can be a game changer in stemming the tide of attacks. Also, reporting these incidents and experiences to law enforcement, understanding that we may not be able to action all of them, is still needed. Why? Because it allows us to have a better visibility and therefore aim our limited but powerful resources and methods in the right place. Another game changer. So I mentioned in my opening remarks, what makes me so impressed with this new facility that we are celebrating today is that on a micro level, this war room embodies all of those virtues that will be needed in our national fight against cybercrime. It was funded by the Long Island Regional Economic Development Council in part, which is a New York State and private sector partnership. It will be used to teach students how to be effective cybersecurity warriors, and it will be made available to IT members of local businesses and municipalities so they can get better at cybersecurity as well. That sharing part will also work to foster and encourage collaboration and partnerships. So once again, congratulations on getting this done. So I wanted to take the remaining few minutes of my time. How am I doing on time? Am I okay? Okay. Just talking about appealing to the students, the young adults in this room who maybe have an interest in pursuing a career in the FBI or law enforcement with regards to cybersecurity. Because that is something I recommend, and I definitely encourage you to do so. So I'll just talk a few minutes about how to get involved with cyber in the FBI and how to get involved in the FBI in general. So if you had an interest in working cyber with the FBI, you can do it in a couple of different paths. You could apply to be an FBI agent. You could apply to be an intel analyst. and you could apply to be a computer scientist specialist. Now, the first two I mentioned, agent and analyst, if you apply for those positions, you don't apply specifically for cyber. You have to apply for those roles in the agency. So there is a possibility that you'll get hired as an FBI agent or get hired as an intel analyst and not be assigned to cyber. But that's okay, because if you do have some cyber skills and you do have an education in cyber, which is sorely needed in the FBI, I'm quite confident you can eventually get transferred over to a cyber squad or division. It just may take a little bit of time. Wouldn't surprise me if you got put there right away. Now, as a computer scientist specialist, which we do have positions there, obviously there you will work cyber immediately. Those computer scientists are basically embedded with us on our squads, and they bring that cyber expertise that some of us agents don't have to help us analyze logs and look through forensic evidence and so forth. So myself, you heard a little bit about my career in the introductory remarks. I'm fairly new to cyber. I'm not a technical person. I don't have a bachelor's degree or undergraduate degree in computer science. I was what we call in the FBI a knuckle dragger for many, many years, which was violent crime, drug trafficking, gangs, things of that nature. You know, the fun stuff. So I did that for a very long time and decided that cyber was where it was at, and that's the emerging threat and where everything was going. So I wanted to challenge myself and I wanted to learn. So I actually demoted myself from a supervisor back down to an agent so I can come over. And I've been a student ever since. And it's been a really rewarding and interesting experience. So there are many different paths to getting where I'm at now. But if you are a cybersecurity student and you're pursuing this academically, it's going to be a much easier path, a much easier way to get there, assuming that you're able to be hired by the FBI. So I'll leave it at that and open it up for a few questions. Is that okay? You gotta come to the microphone, I think. Is most folks here New Yorkers? Okay, so then you appreciate how fast I talk. So I apologize for the fast talking, but it's just my nature.
As we've all said, time is money, so I'll keep this simple.
Sure.
My question is more on a macro scale. How do we cut off the problem before it becomes a problem and help educate our lawmakers and regulators in how big of an issue this is? Because I've spent the last 5 years arguing with the SEC, along with the entire financial industry, and I know that you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so I will say that I know for sure that that our laws, as it pertains to cyber intrusions, unauthorized access, are very antiquated and need to be updated. I assume that's going to happen sometime soon. I don't know when. It's up to Congress, obviously, but everybody's familiar with GDPR, I'm sure, what Europe went through. I anticipate at some point we're going to see something like that in the United States. Not on the scale of that. I don't think the United States has the appetite for that level of control. But I do think that we should be seeing some sort of update to our legislation. We are dealing right now with laws, we're charging laws that were on the books in the early 80s. And a lot of it is just not practical to what we're dealing with now. A lot of venue issues with how the old statutes are written when people doing cyber attacks back then did it from the actual place that they were sitting. Now that doesn't happen anymore. Yes, I don't know if that answers your question, but we definitely need to update our laws. But in terms of getting out ahead of threats, that's not an easy answer. I think partnerships and more task forces and partnerships is probably one answer to that question, but that's a very complicated, very complex question. Anybody else? Sure. I think they want you to go to the microphone, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Thank you for a great presentation. Sure. Where are most of the hackers coming from? Are they particular countries?
Yeah, we definitely see an increased volume out of Eastern European countries, a lot from Russia, and a lot from Asia. So I mentioned it earlier in my presentation. Obviously, the national security side, it's the big players are North Korea, China, Russia. But the criminal actors are also pretty prevalent there as well. And I would say Eastern European countries as well. And surprisingly, more than you would probably would think out of Canada. Would surprise you. Surprise me. Sure.
A question on, I guess, behalf of the students. Cybersecurity as a topic is a mile wide. You
Right.
focus on one particular slice of
Yep.
that. From the standpoint of somebody interested in the topic, how would you sort of summarize the nature of the work you do and the characteristics of the kind of person who would both excel at and enjoy the kind of work that you do? How could somebody look at themselves and say, that's for me?
Yeah. So, well, first, I think you have to have somewhat of a interest and desire in law enforcement in general, obviously, because the mission is still the law enforcement mission. It is a service mission, so I think you have to have that as a basis. But to work cyber in particularly, definitely having a technical acumen, definitely having an engineering or technical type of mindset is going to be extremely helpful. Look, at the end of the day, traditional investigations, I like to make it seem like it's all that complex or all that, difficult, but really it's a lot of common sense when it comes to regular cases. Really, what makes a successful agent in my mind is attitude, work ethic, common sense. All of those things are what makes a good agent. So you take those traditional attributes and you add to it little technical ability to handle the more complex types of evidence we deal with in cyber. I think you got yourself a pretty good cyber agent right there.
We have one question up there. If you can please go to the microphone.
In your cases, how common is it that you come across like organizations, like underground organizations?
I'm sorry, what kind of organizations?
In your cases, like, is cybercrime organized usually?
Oh, yes, that's so both. There are a lot of freelancers out there. There are a lot of individual one-offs that are doing this stuff. But in the J.P. Morgan Chase example I gave you earlier, and by the way, there was other arrests made in that case. I didn't want to take up too much time. But that was a small criminal organization that hired that individual to do the hacking. But they were a group, somewhere around 5 to 6 actors that were working together, located in different parts of the world, but they were organized and working together. So we do see that. We don't see large organizations. I did mention in my remarks that we are seeing some criminal activity being funded and being supported by nation states. So if you want to call that an organization. But beyond that, we're not seeing large-scale organizations, but we are seeing groups of 5 to 10 individuals working together as a team. So definitely we see that. And then we see a lot of individuals as well. Sure. Oh, yeah, want to go first? Oh, we'll do this gentleman first.
I was just wondering, how would you suggest we protect ourselves? Like what browsers to use, what VPNs to use, things of that nature.
Yeah. Look, yeah, that's not really. I'm not really in that business, but I mean, I think it's some common sense stuff. I mean, yeah, I actually don't think VPNs are as secure as you may think they are. So I'll just leave it at that. But just being cognizant of what your settings are on your phone or on your laptop, being in public places with your Wi-Fi on, Bluetooth and things of that nature. There are a lot of attacks that happen that way. So just a lot of common sense stuff, just being diligent about that. It sounds really silly and arbitrary, but just good passwords. I think passwords are going to go away eventually, but you'll be surprised how many cases we have where the entry point was just a really bad password. I mean, it's surprising to me, but it happens a lot. And not cross-pollinating your passwords, which we all do. I've done it too. Where you have one password that you use across multiple accounts. That could be devastating because if that one password is compromised, the hackers, they know that, and they'll hit every single platform they think you're on. And if you use the same password across all of them, they'll be in all those accounts just like that. So, using unique passwords, it's a pain. It really is. But That's a big one. And just being aware of what your settings are, what your environment is, where you are, I think that goes a long way. I think a lot with cyber threats today, this is both personal and on a network scale, comes down to a lot of, the low-hanging fruit. What we're seeing a lot is that because network security systems have gotten very good, and there are a lot of good firewall SIMs and things of that nature, the hackers are really looking for easy targets. I look at it as the equivalent of driving down a street and just looking to see whose windows are open. It's a lot of what's happening out there. So if you're just not as weak as the next guy next to you, I think you're in pretty good shape. But it's actually true. So I don't know if that really answers. I mean, I'm not really a cybersecurity consultant. I really couldn't give you a whole array. I would just say just those points. Yeah. Sure.
All right. Do you think private and public sector are taking full advantage of the general public? With the rise of things like bug bounty programs, some companies will invest in stuff like that, but it's still very minuscule in terms of the overall big picture. And I think there's a lot of people in the cyber field who would be willing to do free work almost, or find things but are just too scared to report them. And those things then go unnoticed, under the radar, and might get taken advantage of later.
Well, the short answer to your question is no, I don't think we're doing it. There's not enough of that going on. That was kind of, I think, the premise of my presentation. Well, not really, but sort of. I think there is this, and it's understandable, there is this culture of privacy around cyber threats. If you're breached as an individual or a company, there's a particular amount of shame associated with that, obviously. And there's a tendency to not want to share that, and it's understandable to some extent. But just understand that when you're not sharing that information or doing something collaborative that way, you're not helping the greater cause. So there's a balance there. And like for example, we at the FBI will tell folks when we go in to do our outreach to companies, look, we don't, even if we want to open a case, we don't necessarily have to. Like, you can communicate to us, you can tell us about a breach that you had in your network. And you could say, look, we want to tell you about this, we really don't want you to investigate it. We probably won't do that. We may push you a little more if you're a critical infrastructure component, or if you have some other association that we're more interested in. But generally speaking, if you don't want to investigate it, we're usually fine with that. We have plenty of other cases to go around. But we want the information because the information helps us identify the landscape. So the identification of that landscape, which I think is kind of the premise of your question, is what's needed across the board. The cybersecurity community has to start thinking of itself as a community, and has to start sharing information collaboratively. If we do that, we're going to do a lot to push back what I call the enemy.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good presentation.
Thank you.
Great awareness. Is the FBI the only division in the government that's actually handling cybersecurity?
No.
And there isn't? Okay. And do you guys just react? Does the FBI just react to attacks, or is there a big grand plan to see the big picture? And especially some of the attacks that cause economic doom to a lot of organizations, namely the city of Baltimore recently.
Yeah.
Hospitals in California, where like ransomware attacks just can put a business out. Is there a big grand plan to maybe help educate the private sector, help them with tools from a government perspective? Because you can't combat, nation states that in a small private sector.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So there is a national strategy that's come out of the White House. It's more really geared towards a major incident response. And so I'll break down your question in a couple of different parts. As far as who handles cyber threats, the way we look at it nationally, if we had a national event or a large-scale cyber attack, what the White House policy says is that the three main entities that are going to be involved in that are going to be Homeland Security, HSI, the FBI, and DOD. HSI is going to be the point for mitigation and for getting critical infrastructure back up and running, and for solving that problem. We're going to be the lead on the investigation, trying to figure out who's behind it and getting attribution. And then DOD is going to play a role if it's a nation state, and maybe even do some sort of offensive retaliation or something of that nature. So they're always going to play a role. That's sort of how we're laid out that. But more at the street level, a couple of different agencies, law enforcement federal agencies, works cybercrime outside of the FBI. Secret Service does, HSI does as well. So I'm not sure how they stack up. FBI, I would imagine, has the most resources on the federal level applied to this threat, but other agencies do as well. Now, as far as a national strategy on how we're combating cybercrime, I'm not aware of a national plan. We at the FBI have a plan. We have a strategic plan that is updated every year, that is farmed out to the field offices and helps dictate to us how we align our cyber resources and what we're going to be going after. One thing we do, which you mentioned in your earlier part of your question, in terms of educating the private sector, a couple of different things. We do things called flashes and pins, where we'll send out basically like flyers, notifications to certain industries that will advise them of trends that we're seeing that may impact them, or some guidance about how they can make their networks better. So we do have those circulations. We have InfraGard as well, which is a partnership that we have with the private sector, where we have members who become part of InfraGard, and then they are associating with us and meeting with us, and we're having more collaboration with them. So there's a couple different ways that we do that, and we do quite a bit of outreach as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for the informative presentation. As my colleague Dean Lenigan alluded earlier, at Hofstra we offer a range of degrees from bachelor's to master's level for the students who are entering the early part of their education. The bachelor's in computer science and cybersecurity is seeking NSA accreditation. So that's an accreditation you need to be able to work at a place like FBI. And we are hoping our close proximity with FBI New York City office would also enable us to hopefully have a co-op program so our students in the program can spend some time at their organization as well. And we serve our facilities, obviously, for FBI New York City, so they don't have to go all the way up to Cambridge, and they'll be able to take advantage of our facility. So please join us for a tour of our facility next door. At the Cybersecurity Center, there's going to be technical demonstrations, and you will get to see the sophisticated technology which is available to the students when they're taking courses at Hofstra. Refreshment will also be served. Once again, please join me to thank the Special Agent for this informative presentation.